this section, I'll be going through some different techniques for using metal flashing around walls and chimneys. Just like pipe flashings and valleys, these areas are some of your most likely to leak, and as a result, following these techniques carefully is super important. Applying metal flashing to both walls and chimneys is pretty similar in its technique, so I'm going to demonstrate all of those techniques on this chimney section in detail, and then cover a few more details on working around siding and walls in the dormer section of the video. All of this flashing is going to be done with a two-part system that uses both a base flashing that interfaces with the shingle and a separate flashing called counter flashing that covers over top of that flashing. In the case of wall intersections, it's usually the siding material that's going to take the place of counter flashing as it comes down over top of the base flashing. I'll go through the base flashing and step flashings first and then come back to cover the counter flashing. If your chimney has siding on it rather than brick, we're going to be doing that section second as well. As you can see that I've made our model here with both a brick and a siding side, so that's why it looks a little funky. But the base and step flashing is basically the same for both. Just I'll show you a couple techniques. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching this video. Please hit subscribe so you can be a part of my channel. You can watch all my videos that cover complete stages of both shingle and metal roofing. There's tons more content coming out soon about all aspects of roofing, including skylights and trim and sheds and whatever you're interested in. Before I go into the different specific techniques that we're going to be doing for the flashing, I wanted to just speak briefly about some of the materials that we're going to be using. One of the main things that I like to use when we're doing our flashings is a piece of aluminum like this. This is sold as aluminum trim coil. Okay, it's generally sold as an accessory for vinyl siding, that sort of thing, to be bent and wrapped around fascias and stuff, but it's a common item to find at roofing suppliers. This is really nice. This piece comes in a 24-inch wide roll, so it's 2 feet wide. Usually comes in about a 50-foot length. I pay, 60 bucks for it, something like that. It's probably a little more than you're going to need on a typical project, but it's going to make a real nice finished product. And I'd encourage you to pick one up if you can find it. If not, you can find rolls of smaller flashing pretty easily at your home improvement stores. We're going to use this for the counter flashing and also for the end wall flashings at the top and the bottom of the chimney. Aluminum is really nice, obviously, because it never rusts. So as a counter flashing piece that goes over top of the galvanized, it's going to look really well. This particular piece comes in both black, it's white on the back side, and you can get maybe a couple other colors like a brown. In this case, the black we usually use. If you're using a brown shingle, you might want to go with the brown metal. But the aluminum trim coil is really nice to use. So now I want to make this point too. I've got what's known as a metal brake here, okay, and it's a big specialty tool. It's real expensive. We use it to bend the metal real nicely. You'll see when we get to some of the pieces. You're not probably going to have one of those or know somebody who does, so it's going to be a little more challenging to make the pieces. But I will say one tool that is pretty affordable that you might be able to find pretty easily is a little bender tool like this. And this is just a little hand seamer, and you can't bend real big pieces of metal, but for the counter flashing pieces that we're going to make later, I'll show you how to use this. These are pretty cheap. You can pick something up similar to this at a typical home improvement store. So that's the trim coil. I'm going to be going into more detail. This is a piece of galvanized step flashing. It's 4x4 on a bend. I'm going to be talking about this. These are sold pre-made, but you could obviously buy a big roll of metal and make these yourself if you wanted to. And another point that I'm going to make, because you might have access to all these tools or whatever, you can buy some different profiles of metal flashing pretty easily at your typical big box home improvement store. That's where I picked this one up. This is galvanized. This is going to be like a sidewall flashing piece. But they do sell some different profiles of this. I'm not a huge fan of this particular piece. I'll show you that when we get to that. But you might be able to find in that trim section some of the different pieces that I'm going to be showing you already pre-made. So you can check around there for some pieces if you're a little intimidated to make some of the pieces that I'm going to show you. I'll start with end wall flashing, as this is always going to come first because it's at the low end. Whether it's a wall or a chimney that you're coming up against, you're always going to want to first run your ice and water shield around the perimeter all the way around the top, And then also I like to run it up the wall a couple inches. So that's going to help protect this joint in here. And so you can see we've run the ice and water shield. It's coming up the side here. I don't know if that's going to show up real well, but you can see on the side here that it runs up and comes up the side of the wall a couple inches. One thing that I want you to be careful about is these corners right here. Either these two corners are probably one of the easiest places to have a leak because it's hard to bend everything around in several different directions, and it creates a hole right here. So what we've done is run this up the wall, and then where it extends past here, we make a slit right here and then fold this tab over. You want to make the slit so that it stops just a little bit short of the actual chimney or corner that you're flashing, so that it doesn't create a hole right there. So this is going to fold over like that. This is a little cold right now, so this isn't sticking real well, but you could put a nail or a staple or something in this to hold this flap on there like this. So next, you're going to run your shingles all the way up to the base of the chimney or wall. To flash this area, I use this piece of L-shaped metal, and it's called an end wall. This is pretty easy to find. You want to look for a variety or make a variety that has a hemmed edge at the bottom. Okay, so this is what's going to go down over the shingles, and it's got this little fold in it, and what that fold does is make the metal much stronger at this edge. Then this edge is much more flexible. So this is just going to make it look a little cleaner. It's not really going to keep any more water out, but it's going to lay flatter against the shingles and not get a little wave in the metal real easily. So also, I want you to notice that this piece is not bent quite at a 90-degree angle. You want to leave it a little bit open. Now, of course, this is a pretty steep roof, so the angle itself is not 90 degrees, but you want to leave it a little more open, a little bit wider than the actual angle that you're going to do. And that way it'll be possible to press it into place, and you're going to use some of that tension in the metal to keep it seated firmly against whatever it is you're going up against it. So I just say that if you don't have the brake like I was talking about, it's pretty easy to make a piece of metal like this if you have the trim coil or some other roll of metal. You know, cut the metal to length. Always make it a little bit longer. It's easy to trim it off later. And you know, I've made pieces of metal like this real successfully just with a couple 2x4s, or you could just carefully mark your line out and bend it along the edge of something that's really firm. Have a friend help you something like that. And then also you can use your hand seamers to just trim, bend over the edge of the metal like this to get this nice hem on it. So we've got the shingles all run up tight against the chimney. The next step is to put your piece of metal firmly up against the chimney and make some marks for your cuts. You want the edges to fit tightly around the corners of the chimney, so make sure you make an accurate mark here and here. Cut the metal piece off so that it's 3 inches longer or so than the width of the chimney. Next, what you want to do is cut a slit here at the bend so that you'll be able to bend this lip back onto the side of the chimney. To get it to fold, you'll need to cut a triangular piece of metal off like this to accommodate the pitch of the roof. I'd advise you to make your cut a little short of the side of the chimney to make sure that your flanges end up fitting tight against the walls of the chimney. When you've trimmed it back correctly, it's going to look like this. Before you put it into place, you're going to want to put a nice bead of sealant down in both corners behind the flashing and along the back wall as backup. Push it into place tightly so that the metal is all the way in the corner. Place a few nails or screws in the flashing here at the lower edge to hold it down. To attach your flashing to the roof, you could either use some nails and then cover it up. I'll show you that in a second. But what I'd encourage you to do, just like with the pipe flashings, is to use one of these metal roofing screws with the washer. Regardless of whether or not you use the screw or the nail, just like with the pipe flashings, you don't ever want to get your nails or screws too close to the corners or too close to the bottom edge. And that's because water can either come around underneath the flashing and leak in there, or come back up under this bottom edge of the flashing and leak in the nail hole. So you see, I've used a couple of screws. You don't have to overdo it. This is on here real securely. You can see that the hem that I put on the bottom made this nice and stiff, so the flashing looks nice and tight, and it's seated real firmly up against the shingles at the base. So as with all of your flashings, you don't ever want to attach this piece on the roof to the wall or the chimney. This will allow the building or the chimney or deck to expand and settle slightly without tearing or buckling the flashing. So if you attach this up here and the chimney settles over time, it's really going to mess up your flashing. When we run the flashing like this with the screws, really don't have to do anything else to the base of this flashing. The screws have the washers on them and they're watertight. Now, if you don't have these screws or you want to do what I'm about to show you, that's fine too. You can put a couple nails over it, but if you nail it down, you're going to want to cover it back up, because you could put some caulk on top of those nails, but eventually that caulk's going to wear out, so you're going to want to cover that up later. So to do that, you've got a couple of options. First, you can lay down a couple thick beads of sealant or a big patch of roof cement, and you can cut a piece of shingle, like we've got this 3-tab, like your hip and ridge shingles, and you can glue this over top. And it's going to look a little funny here, and probably would trim the shingle back a little bit like this, but what we do is run these like this after you put your roof sealant down, and then just, you know, like you would with the hip and ridge, cover them up, boom, 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 as you go across. And that's going to help hide the flashing and blend it back into the roof. This is a good technique to use if you don't have the nice black trim coil that's going to blend into the roof well. If you use a bright silver galvanized flashing, it might not look so well. You could also, if you wanted to cover it up and sort of blend it back in with the pattern of the shingles, some people like the way that looks, we just cut a strip of the architectural shingles and lay one piece over like that, and just kind of glue it over top of the flashing. So that works well too. Just make sure to lay a bead of sealant across the top of the metal before you run these shingles to keep water from running down back behind it to the nails. And when you're done, you got this on here, or a piece going like that, you can always caulk back here just as, you know, extra precaution to make sure that water doesn't get back behind there, because these nails are always going to be vulnerable to leaking. Now that we've got the base end wall flashing down, we're ready to work up the sides of the chimney. I want to make a quick mention of this piece that I brought out earlier, because it's pretty common and you may find it on your house already. It's this type of one-piece sidewall flashing like this. This is going to go up the chimney, this comes out onto the roof, and it's got this little kickback on it. These are pretty common, especially with like new construction houses and stuff, and this is an easy piece of flashing that you can buy and find it, and it's just going to go like this, and you bring your shingles over on top. I'd strongly discourage you from using it. It might seem a little simpler than using the step flashing that I'm going to show you about in a second, but I'm not a big fan of this. It's got this lip on it that kind of kicks up the shingles. A lot of people don't like how that looks. And I say it's definitely more vulnerable to leaking and having problems later. So if you've got a piece like a flashing like this on there already and you're working on some siding and it's already there, it's okay as long as it's not that beat up, but I'd avoid using something like this. What I do encourage you to use are these individual pieces of metal called step flashing, as I mentioned earlier. You can buy these pre-made out of steel or aluminum, and they're generally 4x4 by I think 7 inches. So one important point I'd like to make about these pieces of pre-made step flashing, as you can see, it's not a 90-degree bend. Just like I was saying with the end wall flashing, it's open a little bit so that when you push it up against it, it seats tightly. If it was a 90-degree, you might see some separation back here like that. So these always go on top of the shingles, and you're going to place the piece of step flashing on top of the shingles so that it comes past the edge of the chimney like this. So this little piece of flashing at the corner here is going to be left sticking out, and we're going to come back and trim it off so you don't see it. You're going to put 2 nails into the top, very top outside edge of the step. Again, never attach your flashing to the chimney or house that you're working against. The step flashing always stops right at the bottom of the reveal of the next shingle. So in this case, I can kind of work over here. You see my nail line, and that's where this first piece of step flashing is going to end. So it pretty much is right at the top of the shingle, and it's going to come right down here. So it's okay if a little bit sticks out when you cover it with the next shingle, but you don't want to run it too far because you're going to get coverage here, and you're going to see in a second when we put these next shingles on how that really works. So you're going to run this down here, and then like I said, we're going to trim this off a little bit. So before I go ahead and put it into place, you can make a mark on the back of it like this, so you know what you need to trim off. So we've got this piece nailed in. I've got it trimmed off so that there's going to be a little bit showing, but I like to keep a little bit off here. Don't resist the tendency to trim it flush here to the corner and trim all of this off, because like I said, this corner back behind it is your most vulnerable place to have a leak. So it's always a good idea before you put this down, again, put a big bead of sealant back here, embed this into the sealant and protect that corner right there. So this, leaving this little lip like this, is going to keep all the water that's going to be running off here going right past that corner and away from that leak prone area. So I've got the nail in the corner here, and just you know, the metal might stick up a little bit, depends on the configuration of your roof and what you're working with like that, but you don't ever want to put a nail in here or in this part of metal. You see we've got this screw set way far back here because there's going to be a lot of water coming down here. So this is just laying flat on the roof like that. What we do next is run the next course of shingles over top of the flashing, and you want to leave a small gap between the end of the shingle and the vertical side of the flashing. Never place a nail through the shingle and into the step flashing. Again, you might have that tendency to want to tighten it down here at the edge, but that's going to certainly lead to a leak. You'll always want to keep your nails right over here, right at the edge of the flashing. So when you're nailing your shingle on over top of the step flashing, resist the urge to keep it close to the edge right here, okay? Because what's going to happen, and this is really how step flashing works, is water's going to come down here, and it's going to allow it to roll underneath the other shingle. Like say water comes down here, and it's going to roll underneath that shingle and out onto the step flashing. So you don't want to have a nail like right here at the edge, although it wouldn't be going through the step flashing, which you never want to do. It's still going to be pretty close to this water that's going to be traveling out here and then down over the top of the shingle. So you say I've got several inches here between my next nail and the edge of the step flashing. And then that's basically how this works. We're going to work our way up the chimney with the step flashing. Again, this, you can always see on the architectural shingles, this is the line that we cover with the next shingle. So it's always going to come down right to about that line so that the next shingle over basically hides that bottom edge of the step flashing. So you want to just keep going with your step flashing until you reach the top of your wall or chimney. And like we did down at the bottom, you're going to want to be real careful about this corner right here. So before you put your last piece of step flashing on, you can put a good, nice little bead of sealant behind it. And you'll see what we did here, because this piece of step flashing that went under here ended really like right at the corner of the wall. So we just went ahead and put another piece of step flashing on top of it that overlaps it a lot more than the other pieces, but that's okay too. It doesn't matter how much you got in there. So we put the second piece on there so we could sort of come up past and around the back side of the chimney, bend it, cut that triangular shape and bend it back around here, and got it seated in here real good, okay? So now that we're got to the back side of the chimney, I'm going to discuss a couple different options, because there might be one of two different things back here. Like our model might have nothing, or you might have what's known as a cricket. In this, obviously your cricket on your house wouldn't be removable, but I just want to show you what we've got here. A cricket is like a little roof that goes behind your chimney. And it sits back in here like this, and it helps to divert water around it. Instead of all the water running in just into the back of it, it's going to run around the side of it. Now, I'll be honest with you. I'm not a huge fan of crickets. While they sound like a good idea, I haven't ever found them to be essential to keeping the area leak-free. Some people are a big fan of them. I'm not so much. But where I do think that they're a good idea is when you've got a wide chimney and maybe just a wide chimney in the middle of the roof, or especially if you have a wide chimney and it's at the bottom of the roof and you've got a lot of water or debris that are coming down the roof. In these cases, I think a Cricut is justified. Aside from that, I wouldn't go to the trouble, as they really add a layer of complexity to the flashing that in a way I think makes it more likely that something is going to get screwed up. So if you've got a huge chimney that's 6 feet wide and a lot of water running into it, it's hard to move that water off quickly from back behind it, especially if you live somewhere you've got a lot of snow and ice and that sort of thing. So Cricut might be a good idea in that situation, but other than that, I don't think they're really that essential. One point that I do want to make about the Cricut, especially if you're building one, the mistake that I see most with the Cricuts is when they get built, and then maybe they get built and then the siding and everything gets put on, is the corner where this valley from the Cricut comes out is a little shy of the actual edge of the chimney. And instead of shooting the water out and around the chimney, it really directs a lot of the water right into this back corner of the chimney. So if you're building one, or if you've got one, make sure to look out for that. It doesn't need to come way out to the side, but you want to make sure that the valley, after the roofing and everything's on, shoots the water to the side and not into the back of it. So that said, let's take a look at this Cricut and how we're going to flash around it. We've already got our step flashing in here. We've got it bent around here. And to do this, we're going to use the same basic techniques that we used on the valley in the other part of the house. So you've got a valley here and a ridge, and can't see it on the camera, but there's a sidewall area here on the back where we're going to just do step flashing just like we did here. So first, of course, you're going to come up to this point, and then we're going to get ice shield wrapped all over the Cricut on the top, and in the valley, of course, is real small, so it's going to cover everything. So I've got this piece of ice and water shield here that we already cut, and basically you want to get it in here so that, again, we're always looking to protect this corner real well. So it's going to come down here, and it's actually, you want to look at, you know, I can see my shingle, the nail line here where the next shingle is going to come down, and we don't want to really expose any of the ice and water shield, but I'm going to go ahead and install it so that it comes down over top of that. Place it in here. We can trim it back so that we don't see it, anything like that. So once we've got this in here, we're basically going to run our valley just like we did on the other part. The next shingle is going to come on top here and lay up over into the valley. And then we're going to, if you use the closed cut valley like I demonstrated, because there's more water moving down this, remember, than this side, we're going to have these shingles on this side get the cut. Therefore, after we've woven this first shingle up and over the Cricut, we're going to lay the shingles that go on the Cricut down over here, up here, and then bring these shingles across and make the cut. And then you just finish off the ridge and the point here, just like you would at the peak of the valley, excuse me, at the peak of the dormer like I showed you in that section. All right, so if you don't have a Cricut behind your chimney, no problem. Especially on a chimney like what we have here for our model. It's only probably 2 feet wide. I really like doing the flashing just like I'm about to show you. So what we've done is made a similar piece to the front. With it, this is just a simple bend. As you can see, an L-shaped bend here. We're going to go up the back side of the chimney 6 inches, and I just cut it out of the full piece of trim coil that we're using, which is 24 inches. If you don't have a full 24-inch trim coil, don't use a little short piece. Like, you don't want something like the front that's 6 inches and 6 inches. You want at least 12 inches of coverage going back up the roof, because you can imagine there's all this water coming down, and want to make sure that this is going to accommodate any water that gets built up behind the chimney before it washes off. So once you've got this piece made, again, we made it like the front, about 6 inches wider than the chimney. You're going to dry fit it in place to make sure that it fits snugly and is tight into the corner, okay? So again, like the front piece, and this is a little easier here because this is a pretty acute angle, we didn't bend it to the exact angle of the roof. We're going to put it into place like this, and the fact that the angle of this trim is a little greater than what we've got here on the roof, this helps make it fit real nice and tight. So we're going to let it run, like I said, 6 inches on either side of this. And before we settle this in completely, we're going to put, again, a nice bead of sealant down here in this corner behind the metal, in this trim coil, or in the step flashing here, because this corner again is very leak prone. So I'm going to put this in here, and we're going to let it run out like this. Resist the temptation to cut this and fold this in and stuff, because what you really want is the water to hit this piece of flashing and run out and go off this way. If you cut this real tight and bend it over, you're going to have all this water that's directed right at that corner, and because there's no pitch to this or valley or anything like that, it's going to be moving very slowly, and you're going to have definitely issues with leaks in this corner here. So when we put this in, we're going to go ahead and just nail it back here. We'll probably have some nails in the shingles a little lower, but we can go ahead and nail this in back here to keep it into place. But before we trim it, and now that we've got it fit and even on both sides, I'm going to make a mark here where it hits on the corner, and I'm going to do a little detail here and trim this corner off a little bit. This part up here isn't doing any good, although like I said, down low we want to make sure that this is full piece of metal here. So I'm going to make a little mark here, trim this corner off so that it just looks a little bit cleaner and you don't have this nice sharp edge here that might cut you later on. So I've got this nice and trimmed off here in the corner. Like I said, we can put some nails back here. Ideally, you'd have this piece of flashing shingled in, as they say, with the underlayment. So you probably already got your underlayment on here. So what you could do is cut a nice piece of ice and water shield to lay down on top of this, and then weave it in with the shingles, just to give you a little bit of extra protection. But so we can bring the next shingle in, and as you can see, it's just sort of worked out pretty well with the pattern that we had established already. The nail line is right here, and I'd say, you know, it's a good 8 to 10 inches from the base of the flashing here where it meets the chimney, and that's okay. So we can just go ahead and nail on this line through the flashing that high. If the shingle pattern had worked out so this was a lot tighter and the nail line was just a couple inches or whatever from that bend, you definitely wouldn't want to do that, because even though those nails are going to get covered up by the next shingle, water could work its way back up under there and leak in down behind it. So in that case, if let's just say the shingle pattern worked out like that, you're just going to have to nail this particular shingle a little bit higher. Like I said, 8 inches from the base of the flashing is probably going to work out fine. One of the virtues of shingles in this type of flashing is that, you know, the shingle sits very flat on it. You've got your glue line, so it's going to glue to it. So not a ton of water is going to want to be able to get back up in there, but you do want to make sure to make allowances for the fact that heavy rain, a lot of water builds up here, might get back up under there. So just be careful, keep your nails out of the base. Now that we've got the base flashing and the step flashing down, we're ready to install the counter flashing over the top. As you can see, this flashing and the step flashing are going to do a good job of keeping the water from getting at this joint down here and over here, but any water that travels down the side of the chimney is just going to easily get behind here, even though we put a little bit of sealant back here. So any type of painted or galvanized steel or aluminum is going to work well for this. But like I was saying before, I really like this aluminum trim coil because A, it's aluminum and it's never going to rust, and the aluminum is also much easier to bend and work with than the thicker steel. So to install the counter flashing, you're going to want to cut a groove in the brick to accept the top flange of the counter flashing that looks like this. So what we're going to do is bend this metal over using my little hand seamers and insert that into a groove that we're going to make into the brick. And that's going to seal any water that comes down the chimney and bring it out over the top of the flashing. So we're going to cut the groove in the chimney here, and chances are, if you're working with an existing chimney that's not new like this one, there might be an old groove in there from the flashing that was on there before you replaced your roof. So that's always the easiest bet, is to go ahead and carefully remove that old flashing and install your new flashing into the old groove. But for whatever reason, they might not be there. Your new flashing might not fit with it, so you have to cut a new groove. To cut the groove, I'd recommend using an angle grinder like this if you can. It's smaller and easier to maneuver, but if you don't have one, you can also use a circular saw. In both cases, make sure to get a blade that's made for cutting masonry like this. You can either use an abrasive blade that looks like this. These are really inexpensive and they wear down as you use them, but you won't need too many. Or you can use a diamond blade like this, which is longer lasting, a little thinner and easier to use, but it is more expensive than the abrasive blade. So your groove only needs to be an inch at most into the brick, as you don't want to go too far into the mortar and compromise the structure. Your first cut is going to be in the mortar groove directly above the lower base flashing. So in this case, the flashing comes up here, and we're going to go in here. Something to think about when you're making your flashing is where the grooves are in the chimney and stuff like this. We probably could have made ours a little shorter, and so we could have used this groove right here. I always try to make the counter flashings as small as we can, because then you're just looking at less metal, and I think that looks better. So this is going to be the location of our first groove here, and on the sides you can make your cut along the first groove that goes back a decent way over the first step flashing. After that, you're going to make a groove on each successive course of bricks all the way until you reach the top, and you're going to bring that last groove around the corner of the chimney a bit as well. I've got the groove cut in the mortar where I want to put this piece of counter flashing. I got this made up. It's all bent, ready to go. And it's basically just going to fit in here like this, you know, trim it up or whatever you need to do to get it to sit well. And I can look at this and see this is looking pretty good. This isn't a huge piece of flashing. It's relatively sitting pretty flush with the base and that sort of thing. If you've got a really big piece of flashing for whatever reason, or the chimney is uneven, one thing you could do is make a little hem at the bottom of this piece of flashing, and that's just going to stiffen it up and straighten it up and help you get a little cleaner look. It's not really important other than for aesthetics, just like we did at the base of this flashing. So once you've gotten this in here, we've got to hold it into place, and what I like to use for that is this type of nail. This is called a fluted masonry nail. It's real easy to find at hardware stores and that sort of thing. It's a special extra hard nail that's used for attaching things to masonry, things like the chimney or something like that. So what we don't want to do is put it through the side of the flashing, because then that's going to be prone to leaking later. So what I like to do is put a few of them right in here in the joint that we just cut. So we're going to pound a few of these in here, and that's going to hold the flashing in real tight here at the top. Obviously, when we're done, we're going to come back through with some of our sealant and fill this up real good and make it look real neat. You know, depending on the configuration of your chimney or whatever too, sometimes I like to put a nice big bead of sealant or roofing cement behind this. You can also put some down here if it looks like it's going to work to help kind of glue this in place a little bit. But a lot of them we just leave like this, and it'll last So you can see we've got several pieces on. Just want to make a couple points about what I've done here. I like on the first piece to go ahead, grind the groove a little way around the front, and I got about 1 inch of flashing coming around the front here. Again, this is going to help kind of clean things up, protect this corner, and also this point down here that I was telling you about. So make a little bend, bring it around there, and then each succession piece, actually after you get past this first piece, each piece should be the exact same size. So once you get the first piece fit and it fits in the right place and it looks good, you can just trace it and it should be the same going, every piece should be the same going all the way up. I put the nails in here at the top, and there's one behind the other piece of flashing, and then I also like to put one in here right at the corner where the two pieces meet. So you're holding in this piece and you're sort of pinning the lower edge of this piece down as well. So that's a nice little trick. You don't have to bring all of your flashing down to a point. It's kind of hard if you make this all the way down to a little fine point. It's going to tend to be kind of loose and not look as good. So I like to just cut the bottoms of these off, and we've got them overlapping probably a good 2 inches here, which is a good rule of thumb as far as how far back that they go. The size and shape of your counterflashing pieces are going to be determined really by the angle of the roof and also by whatever you've got as far as siding or bricks go. So if you have really big bricks, the pieces of step flashing are going to be even bigger. This is a normal width brick here, so you've got pretty small regular steps, which I think looks a little bit better than if you had a really like a cinder block or something. You have these really wide pieces going up. These are pretty small pieces. I think they're holding on pretty good with this extra nail here holding down the edge. But if you did have a really big piece, or for whatever reason maybe your chimney's irregular and it's not holding on well, you can use another masonry fastener to like go through the side here and hold it on. I don't like to do that, but sometimes you're just going to need to do that. And if you do, you can use these regular masonry nails, but I prefer to use this type of fastener. This is a masonry fastener that you use a drill bit to drill a hole. This is a 1/4 inch size, so you've got a 1/4 inch hole. You drive this in here, you hit this little nail on the head with your hammer, and it expands out and holds it in. You definitely want to put some caulk over the top or maybe in the hole before you put it in there, but that's going to help hold down any random pieces of flashing that are kind of loose. So that's the general idea for your counter flashing going up the side of your brick chimney. We've just brought a couple pieces here, but it's going to look the same going up and up and up and up. You're going to get up here to the top of your flashing, and you're going to do the same thing up there that you did down here where you wrap it around. So you're just going to have one wide piece of counter flashing at the top that counter flashes your backside here, and you're going to cut a groove in your brick to bring that piece around a little bit, and again that's going to help protect your corner. Once you get to the top, you're going to put a nice bead of sealant down here to help protect this corner, and then you're going to make a nice wide piece of counter flashing in the back with a groove that goes like that. So for those of y'all who are paying close attention to what we've done here, for demonstration purposes, I didn't cut this groove all the way when we were doing it here in the studio, and I didn't want to make a big mess with the grinder again, so we trimmed these guys kind of short. But just for the record, you would want to cut your groove all the way out here to the end so that you had a full lip on the top of this piece of counter flashing going into the brick. That's going to prevent any water that rides down the side of the chimney from getting behind it. When you're all finished, put a nice bead of quality sealant here in the top to finish it off. I'll also say that you can just snap a straight line along the side and cut a groove right through the bricks and mortar. This will leave you with a one-piece counter flashing. Some people like that better. I kind of like the step flashing and grinding into the mortar, but if you don't mind cutting a line through your brick, that might be simpler for you. I've noticed over time that some sealants will shrink a little bit when they cure, so it's always a good idea to come back a week or so after you're finished and make sure that all of your flashing is still sealed up well. You might find a few voids in the sealant that you've already put down that need a little bit of a touch-up. Now we've worked our way around to the other side of the model, and I'm going to give you a few tips on doing the flashing up against siding like this on this chimney. You might encounter the same sort of siding on a dormer or where a roof meets a house, anywhere like that. Often when we do a re-roof on a house, the original flashing for the shingles were installed before the siding was on, and it's already there. If this flashing that's already on the house is in good shape and you can do the tear off without damaging it too much, it's probably okay to go ahead and just reuse that flashing, depending on what type it was. Obviously, if you're having leaks or whatever around your chimney or around that sidewall, you're going to want to go ahead and replace that flashing. But if it's in good shape and you're not having any trouble there, go ahead and reuse it. I don't see any problem with that, unless it's really rusty or something like that. But most of the flashing that we find is made out of aluminum, so it's held up pretty well. So in this instance, I'm going to show you a couple different techniques for installing new flashing over a siding wall like this. Obviously, your very best case scenario is going to be to get your step flashing behind the siding. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. You could just take all the siding off carefully, install the shingles and the step flashing up against the sheathing behind the siding, and then just reinstall the siding over it. You don't need any counter flashing or anything like that, because the siding is going to prevent water from getting back behind the step flashing. However, for whatever reason, you don't want to take your siding off, and this is often the case because it can be difficult to get the siding off or keep it in one piece, and then you're probably going to have to repaint it, etc., etc. You want to leave the siding on, so what we're going to do is run the shingles and step flashing up here. The step flashing is going to be on the outside of the siding, and then we're going to make some counter flashing pieces that fit over the siding and up under it to protect the step flashing that we install. So first step to doing that, and I talk about this in the dormer section as well, you don't have to take the siding off, but there's really no good way to avoid leaving the corner boards on if this is the style of siding that you have. So I've already gone ahead and taken this corner board loose and set it to the side. The reason is, I'll put this back on here to see if you can imagine this, but the reason you want to take the corner boards off is because your step flashing would have to come on the outside of this, and there's no good way to counter flash up against this board like there is with the siding, and I'll show you that in a second. So what we really want to do is take the corner boards off and then have the initial flashing here, this base flashing around the front, as well as the first piece of step flashing is going to go behind where this board is and come out here. That's going to leave you with a cleaner look, but it's also going to be far more waterproof and durable in the long run. So take this piece off and then we can go ahead and get started. So just like on the other side, your first piece of step flashing is going to go down here. You can see our nail line is right here covered up by the piece of base flashing. And we're going to go ahead and install it right here up against this. And as we get a little further up, we can go ahead and replace the piece of corner board that we took off. I've got the piece of step flashing cut and trimmed. I reinstalled the corner board because we're done with that, and we're ready to start running the shingles back up the side of the roof. Same as before, I let this run out a little bit to help protect this corner. I let this stick out a little bit, and as I said on the dormer video, make sure no matter what you've got here to trim this board back an inch or so from the bottom of the roof, because it's going to wick moisture up and rot out if it's touching the shingle. So resist the urge to have it jammed down on there. If you're taking it off, go ahead and trim it back so that there's a little bit of gap between the bottom of the board and the rest of the roof. When I went to put my second piece of step flashing on there, it kind of hit at an awkward place because you can see it would be both behind the counter flashing here, but on top of the corner board. So what I went ahead and did was cut the top of the step flashing down a little bit so it was easy to slide up underneath behind that first piece of flashing. From here on out, we're going to just put the step flashing on the outside of the siding, and I'll show you how to counter flash over top of that. I went ahead and ran the shingles all the way up. As you can see, except for the first two pieces of step flashing, I just went ahead and ran these galvanized step flashings on top of the siding. And now we're going to cut out some of that trim coil that fits over top of this step flashing, and we're going to slide it up under this siding right here, and that's going to prevent water from getting down back behind this. As I was saying earlier, the size and dimension of the counter flashing that's going over top is going to be determined by the size of your siding. So if you have more narrow siding, you're going to have more smaller pieces. If you have a wider piece of siding, you're going to have fewer larger pieces. So we're going to measure and cut to put the piece of counter flashing over top here. I got my first piece of counter flashing cut, and we can kind of dry fit it by just putting in here. I'm going to run it, just butt it up against the corner board here, and it's going to go up behind this piece of siding. If the siding's not loose or there's some nails in there, you might want to use your flat bar or a little nail puller to get back up in here and just loosen a little bit. Obviously this metal's very thin, so you don't need to get too much space to get it up in there, but once we got a dry fit, we're going to get it up in there. Also, again, you don't need to cut the angle super tight to sit down on the roof, or I always just cut the little points off because they're going to get bent up and it's going to kind of not look as good. So. As you can see, I've got several pieces of our counter flashing installed. Just going to go up the roof like this, boom, 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 till you get the top. You also want to take your top corner board off, like I said, to get behind it, like we did down here at the bottom. But as I said before, the width of the siding really and pitch of the roof really determines the size of this. On a more shallowly pitched roof, you're going to have smaller pieces of counter flashing. So if you don't like the way that this metal looks on your house, you've got a couple options. One would be to paint this to match the siding. One would be to take the siding off and get it behind the siding. Or you could use a different color of stock metal to begin with. Maybe you flip this over and use the white side of this, or get a different color that match your siding or something like that. So that'd be some options. One little trick that I want to point out that I did here, because this is such a large piece of metal, is I put like a little almost imperceptible bend on the front edge here with my hand crimpers. And what that does is just sort of stiffen this and straighten this. So it doesn't show up a lot, but it's a neat little trick to get this to be a little straighter. So once this is all the way up in there, personally I would prefer to go ahead and secure it with some of these washer head screws like we've used for a lot of the other flashing. That's going to be your most secure and watertight option. You could certainly put some nails in it, but you want to be careful about blowing a bunch of holes in your counter flashing, because water eventually can get down through those nail holes and that sort of thing. So a couple discrete screws here and there to hold the flashing in is definitely important. For this first piece of flashing here, you'll notice I did make my bend back like I did on the brick side up here, but I got it behind the corner board, and we're going to counter flash this just like we do the sides, by inserting a piece of metal up behind this piece of siding that's going to come down over the front of this one. If you'd like the complete series for yourself on how to do shingle or metal roofing, you can go to my website, roofingintelligence.com, and there you can get a membership to either stream, or you can get a DVD in the mail that'll show you how to do all the steps for either of those types of roofing. Enjoy this video. Thanks so much for watching.